She showed up at the same airport gate every day for 40 years. No ticket, no luggage, just a worn green coat and a photograph she never let go of. Most people passed her without a second thought, but those who looked closer knew there was a story behind her eyes. Then, one day, something happened. Something no one could have predicted. There was a woman who sat in the same seat every day at Terminal B of O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. Not just some days, not just weekends, every single day. For 40 years, she wore a green wool coat, old but elegant, the kind you don't see much anymore. Her silver hair was neatly tied back with a faded ribbon, and in her hands, always, a photograph. Weathered edges, worn center. She held it like it was part of her. Most people rushed past her without a second glance. Airports are full of stories, but few have time to notice them. But those who worked there, they knew her. She was simply known as Margaret. Each morning, around 9 a.m., she'd arrive with a small leather purse and a thermos of black coffee. She'd sit quietly near Gate 17, eyes scanning each arrival, watching the screens light up with the names of places she'd memorized over the years. Hanoi, Bangkok, Manila, Singapore. No one had the heart to ask what she was waiting for. Over the years, some tried, but her answer was always the same. "I'm waiting for James. He said he'd meet me right here." That answer never changed, even when the airport remodeled the terminal and the gate numbers shifted. She still found her spot, exactly where it used to be. Like the soul of the place never left, even when the floor tiles did. Margaret had become a fixture, like the giant clocks or the echo of flight announcements. New employees were told about her like a piece of unofficial airport history. "Be kind to the lady in the green coat. She's part of this place." People brought her sandwiches, coffee refills, sometimes a blanket in the winter. No one really knew her whole story, but they felt its weight. Like her presence made the airport more human, more grounded. Like she reminded everyone that something deeper existed beneath the buzz of business trips and family vacations. And she never looked sad, just expectant. As if at any moment she might leap from her seat and rush into someone's arms. Some believed she was mad. Others called her a romantic. But the truth? The truth was far more powerful than anyone could imagine. Because what no one knew, not yet, was that Margaret hadn't just imagined James. He was real, and he had made a promise. A promise that would change the course of both their lives, and soon, the lives of everyone around them. Her name was Margaret Whitmore. In the summer of 1985, she was 38 years old, worked as a librarian in Oak Park, and had a laugh that made people turn around just to catch a bit of its warmth. She was the kind of woman who sent handwritten birthday cards, who baked pies for her neighbors, and who believed, truly believed, in the good in people. That year, everything in her life shifted. It was a warm July evening when she met him, James Halbrook. He walked into the library looking for a book on Southeast Asia. She noticed his hands first, calloused, strong, and then his eyes, filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Purpose. James was 41, a former Navy pilot turned volunteer for an international medical mission. He was preparing to leave for Vietnam to help train rural doctors and rebuild orphanages destroyed during the war. They spoke for hours that first night about books, travel, and the meaning of home. What started as conversations turned into dinners, long walks, laughter, a kiss under the elm trees near the lake. By October, they were in love. James wasn't just someone Margaret cared for. He was the man who made her feel like she could do anything. He read poetry aloud in coffee shops, played jazz records while they cooked dinner, and he never once looked at his watch when she was talking. With James, time disappeared. And then came the goodbye. They stood together in Terminal B, the same spot she would return to for the next 40 years. James wore a tan field jacket and held her hands tightly, like he was trying to memorize every part of her. "I'll be gone a year, maybe less," he said, brushing her cheek. "But I'll come back to you. Right here. Same place, I promise." Margaret smiled, even though her chest was aching. She didn't cry, didn't cling. She believed him. As he walked toward the gate, he turned back one last time. "Wait for me?" She nodded. And from that day on, she did. At first, there were letters. Long, detailed, filled with hope and excitement. He described the people he was meeting, the children he was helping, and the dreams he had of their life together once he returned. Margaret would read them over and over, folding them gently into her nightstand drawer. She'd respond with pages of her own, about the changing seasons, the scent of her garden, the books she read, and the nights she missed him most. He signed every letter the same way. "Soon, Mags. Always yours, James." But then, the letters stopped. First it was a week without one, then a month, then silence. Margaret called the organization he worked with. They told her he had gone into a remote area near the Laos border. Communications were difficult. It was probably just a delay, but the delay stretched on, into months, then years. And no matter who she contacted, the embassy, the Red Cross, former volunteers, no one could give her an answer. Still, she waited. Because she had promised she would. Because she knew, in her heart, that James had promised too. For the first 6 months after James left, Margaret received letters regularly, every 2 weeks, sometimes more. Each envelope carried his familiar handwriting, slightly slanted, always addressed to Miss Margaret Whitmore. The stamps bore foreign postmarks: Vietnam, Thailand, Laos. She would sit by her kitchen window, tea steeping beside her, and read his words like prayers. He described the sunrises over the Mekong River, the laughter of children in villages where shoes were a luxury, the stories of mothers who'd lost too much, but still sang lullabies at night. He wrote of missing her, of counting the days until he could hold her again. He ended every letter with that same promise: "I'll see you soon, Mags. Wait for me." But then, one spring day, there was no letter. She didn't think much of it. Maybe mail had been delayed. It happened. A week passed, then 2, then 4. Margaret started going to the post office every morning. The clerk began to recognize her by name. "Still no news today, Miss Whitmore," he'd say gently, avoiding her eyes. She tried writing more frequently, 2, 3 letters a week. She sent them to every address James had ever mentioned: the medical camp in Quang Tri, the church in Hue, the embassy in Hanoi. Silence. Margaret called the NGO that had organized the mission. They assured her that James had been seen a few months prior, though they couldn't say exactly where. They were short-staffed. Records were incomplete. Communications in those regions were unstable. But something in the woman's voice, a pause, a hesitation, told Margaret there was more she wasn't being told. She wrote to the U.S. Department of State. The response came weeks later. "We regret to inform you that we have no current information on Mr. James Halbrook. Efforts to locate him are ongoing." Margaret kept every reply in a folder labeled James. It grew thick with unanswered questions. Her family began to worry. Her sister Eleanor visited one weekend and gently suggested it might be time to move on. "You have a life to live, Mags," she said, squeezing her hand. Maybe. He made a choice not to come back. But Margaret's answer was quiet and firm. No, he wouldn't do that to me. And she meant it. She had seen the way he looked at her. She had felt the weight of his promise. This wasn't abandonment. This wasn't rejection. Something had happened. And until she knew what, she would keep waiting. So she began going to the airport once a week. She sat at gate 17, the last place she'd seen him. She told herself it was just a gesture, a ritual to feel close to him. But 1 week turned into two into a month into years. Margaret built her life around that terminal. She brought books to read, a small transistor radio, a travel blanket. Every time a flight arrived from Asia, her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a familiar silhouette. The employees began to notice her. They'd nod in quiet respect as she passed. Some whispered that she was waiting for a lost love. Others said she'd never moved on. A few assumed she was crazy. But the truth was, Margaret was simply holding on to love, to hope, to a man who said he'd return. And deep down, beneath the years of silence, beneath the pain of not knowing, she believed he still would. Margaret never meant to let life pass her by. She didn't intend to grow old inside an airport terminal, or to become the kind of woman people whispered about, the ghost in the green coat, who never gave up on a man the world had forgotten. But when you're waiting for someone you love, time doesn't move the same way. She kept working at the library for a while, showing up early so she could leave early, just in time to catch the evening arrivals at O'Hare. She kept her life in order, paid her bills, tended to her garden, and went to church on Sundays. But there was always that chair near gate 17, that sacred, silent vigil. Friends stopped inviting her to gatherings. She missed birthdays, weddings, baby showers. Not out of neglect, but because she never knew when James might walk through that terminal. She couldn't risk missing him. Suitors came and went, most of them kind. There was George, the widowed dentist who brought her tulips, and Alan, a quiet teacher who wrote her poems on linen paper. But every time she looked into their eyes, she saw someone else. "I'm sorry," she'd whisper, gently pulling away. "My heart's already promised." She told herself she wasn't being foolish. That love like hers didn't just disappear. That when James returned, and he would, she'd need to look him in the eye and say, "I never stopped believing in you." Years turned into decades. The library offered her early retirement, and she took it. Without a job to anchor her, she began spending more and more time at the airport. She'd arrive mid-morning, order the same black coffee from the terminal cafe, and settle into her seat by the window. Some days she brought old letters to reread. Other days, just a photograph. A picture of her and James at the lake, arms around each other, both laughing. Her hair turned silver, her posture softened. The world changed around her. New airlines, digital boards, Wi-Fi signals buzzing in the air. But Margaret remained steady, constant. Airport employees came to know her. One by one, they'd stop to chat, bring her snacks, ask about her day. She always smiled, always listened, but she rarely spoke about James. Not anymore. It wasn't that she had lost hope. It was that her hope had become something sacred, a quiet, private vow she carried inside like a flame. Still, some days were harder than others. She watched families reunite, soldiers returning home, grandparents meeting new grandchildren, business travelers kissing their spouses goodbye, all those hellos and goodbyes, all those beginnings and endings. And she, suspended in the middle, waiting. Sometimes she wondered who she might have become if James had never left. Would they have married? Opened a bookstore by the lake? Raised a child who had his laugh and her eyes? But she pushed those thoughts away. That wasn't her life. Her life was this. A love story unfinished. Some nights, sitting in the dim terminal lights, she would close her eyes and picture him walking toward her. Still tall, still strong. That familiar smile forming as he said her name. Just once. "Mags." And she would answer without hesitation, "You took your time." But in real life, the only voices were muffled announcements echoing overhead, and the only footsteps were strangers hurrying by. And yet, she stayed. Because deep down, something told her. The story wasn't over yet. It was in the fall of 2003 that Charlie Montgomery first noticed her, the woman in the green coat. He was new to the airport then, recently hired as a night shift security guard after retiring from the Army. At 58, Charlie wasn't ready for full-time rest. He missed structure, purpose, and people. At first, he assumed Margaret was waiting for a delayed flight. Maybe she had a nervous habit of pacing the terminal. Maybe she just liked to watch the planes. But she was there again the next night, and the next, and the next. Always the same coat, always the same seat, always that quiet, searching gaze. Charlie didn't approach her right away. He'd been trained not to disturb passengers unless there was a reason. But something about her, the stillness, the grace, made him curious. One night, as he made his rounds, he paused nearby and offered a warm, "Evening, ma'am." She looked up, smiled gently. "Evening." "Flight running late?" Her eyes drifted to the window. "Been late for a long time now." He tilted his head. "That right?" And that was it. From then on, they had an understanding. Charlie would make small talk, weather, sports, headlines. Margaret would respond politely, never too much, never too little. But over time, something shifted. He started bringing her coffee in a paper cup with a lid. "Black, no sugar. Figured I'd try my luck," he said the first time. She chuckled. Right on the nose. But one December evening, when snow fell outside like a lullaby, she told him about James. Not the whole story, just the name and the promise. Charlie didn't laugh. He didn't shake his head or call her foolish. Instead, he sat beside her, adjusting his badge and nodding slowly. "Love's a hell of a thing," he said. "Makes soldiers write letters they don't know if they'll live to send." From that night on, they talked more. Charlie told her about his late wife, Linda, and the little house they used to have in Joliet. He shared stories of the war, the way the sound of helicopters still made his chest tighten, even after all these years. And Margaret, in turn, began to open her heart. She spoke of the library, the letters, the way the terminal felt like a second home. "It's funny," she said once. "I've watched strangers find each other here for decades, but the one I'm waiting for still hasn't come through those doors." Charlie would shake his head, smile, and say, "Then I guess the story ain't done yet." They never crossed the line into anything romantic. Their bond was something deeper. Two old souls who knew what it meant to carry grief and love in the same breath. When Margaret got sick with the flu one winter, Charlie was the one who checked in. When she lost her purse, he helped her find it. And when the airport staff started asking questions about the older lady in Terminal B, Charlie made sure they knew. She's not lost. She's just waiting. And as the years passed, and her steps grew slower, and her hands more delicate, Charlie remained her constant. He'd walk his rounds, but always come back to her. And every time she looked toward the arriving flights, scanning the crowd with that same soft hope. Charlie looked too, because after all those years, he wasn't just watching over her. He was believing with her. Charlie noticed it the moment he stepped into Terminal B. The seat by Gate 17 was empty. No green coat, no thermos, no familiar silver hair tucked beneath that faded ribbon. At first, he thought maybe she was running late. Trains broke down. Elevators stalled. Maybe she was just grabbing her coffee. But 20 minutes passed. Then an hour. The gate announcements cycled through cities and boarding calls. Still, no Margaret. Charlie's stomach turned in a way he hadn't felt since his army days. Something was wrong. He asked around, baristas, janitors, other guards. Nobody had seen her that morning. She hadn't picked up her usual coffee. She hadn't come through security. He checked the security logs. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished. By the afternoon, worry became panic. Charlie called the local police department, then the nearest hospital. He gave them her full name, Margaret Whitmore, and braced for an answer he wasn't ready to hear. She was at Mercy General, admitted 2 nights before, collapsed at home, found by a concerned neighbor who hadn't seen her tending to her porch plants, something she never failed to do, even in winter. She was stable, but not fully conscious. Charlie went straight there, still in uniform, boots wet from the Chicago sleet. When he reached her hospital room, he paused in the doorway. There she was, frail, thinner than he remembered. The green coat folded on a chair. Her photo of James clutched loosely in her hand, as if even in unconsciousness she wouldn't let go of him. He sat beside her, gripping the rail of the bed. "You scared me, Margaret," he whispered. "Don't you go leaving now. Not before you get your ending." For days he visited, read to her from the paper, brought flowers, played jazz from a little speaker. He told the nurses about her, about how she had waited every day for decades for a man who made her a promise. One evening, as the sun set behind a snowy skyline, her fingers twitched. Then her lips moved. Charlie leaned closer. "He's coming," she whispered, eyes fluttering but not fully open. "He's coming." Tears welled in Charlie's eyes. He didn't know if it was a dream or something more, but she believed it. And now, so did he. He went back to the airport the next morning, not because he thought James would actually show up. That idea still felt impossible. But because Margaret had waited so long, someone had to keep her seat warm. Charlie sat there for hours, watching, listening, hoping. And just as the last flight from Bangkok arrived and the weary passengers spilled out into the terminal, a tall man stepped through the gate, a man with a limp, a weathered face, and a scar above his left brow. He stopped, looked around the terminal, and asked softly, almost to no one, "Is there someone named Margaret here?" Charlie stood up slowly, his heart thudding in his chest like a drum. He wasn't the kind of man who jumped to conclusions. Life had taught him to be careful with hope. But this man, something about him felt wrong and right all at once. The limp, the haunted look, the voice that cracked as he asked again, "Is she here? Margaret Whitmore?" The man looked like he had walked through 100 storms. His clothes were plain, his boots dusty, his knuckles weathered and scarred. A thin satchel hung from his shoulder, and from it he pulled out a letter, yellowed with time, carefully sealed. Charlie stepped closer. He narrowed his eyes. "What did you say your name was?" The man hesitated. Then, voice low, almost ashamed, "James. James Halbrook." Charlie didn't speak for a moment. The name hit him like a cold gust of wind. He had heard it so many times over the years, in stories, in sighs, in prayers whispered under breath. "You're telling me," Charlie said slowly, "you're the James Halbrook?" James nodded, his throat tight. "I don't know what you've heard, but I'm looking for her. I've been looking for her since I got out." Charlie studied him. He had that look, the look of a man who had suffered long and lived to carry the pain. "You're about 40 years late," Charlie muttered, folding his arms. "You got a hell of a lot of explaining to do." James looked down. "I know. God, I know." He handed Charlie the letter. "She wrote to me, every week. I never got them. But this one reached me. It's how I found her." Charlie took the letter and unfolded it gently. His eyes scanned the delicate handwriting. It was Margaret's, dated 1993. "My dearest James," it began, "if you are alive and this finds you, know that I am still here, still waiting, at the place you left me, every day, every year. I believe in you." Charlie's voice caught in his throat. James was trembling now. "I was taken," he said, "in '86, a militia group near the Laos border. I was missing for years. Escaped in '91. No ID, no passport, no way to prove who I was. I didn't even remember my own name until much later. Trauma, they said. Memory loss. I lived in a remote village for almost a decade before I started to remember her." He pointed to the photo on the terminal wall, one that Charlie himself had helped post in her honor. A tribute to the woman who waits. "That's her," James whispered. "That's Margaret." Charlie stared at him, silent for a long moment. Then quietly he said, "She's not here." James's shoulders sank. His eyes filled. "She's in the hospital," Charlie added. "Been there for a few days, but she's holding on, she knows." James blinked, as if the weight of it hit all at once. "Can I see her?" Charlie hesitated. Then he nodded. "Come with me." And as they walked out of the terminal together, the ghost finally returned, and the guardian of hope by his side. The airport watched in silence, not a word spoken, but everyone felt it. Something extraordinary had just happened. The ride to the hospital was silent. James sat in the passenger seat of Charlie's pickup truck, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. He looked out at the city like someone seeing it for the first time. And in many ways, he was. Charlie gripped the wheel tight, glancing over every so often. The questions burned inside him, but he didn't ask. Not yet. Not until James saw her. At Mercy General, they moved quickly through the halls. Charlie had been visiting long enough that the nurses simply stepped aside when they saw him. One of them, a kind-faced woman named Denise, gave Charlie a knowing nod. "She's awake," she whispered, "but weak." Room 212. Charlie paused outside the door. "You ready?" he asked. James didn't answer. He just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the photograph, the same one Margaret had carried for decades. It was creased, fragile, but still showed two people in love by a lake, sunlight dancing on water. He nodded once. Charlie pushed the door open. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the slow, steady beep of Margaret's heart monitor. She lay propped up by pillows, her skin pale, eyes closed. The green coat was folded neatly on a chair beside her. The photo she always carried was on the bedside table. "Margaret," Charlie said gently, "you've got a visitor." Her eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly. Her gaze drifted toward the doorway. James stepped inside. He looked like a man walking into a sacred place. He didn't speak, just walked slowly to the side of the bed and knelt down. She blinked, her lips parted. Her voice was barely a whisper. "James." He reached for her hand. "It's me, Mags." Tears welled in her eyes, not from shock, not from fear, but from recognition. She had never stopped knowing him. Charlie turned away, suddenly overcome, and stepped into the hallway. Inside the room, time bent. James pressed her hand to his cheek. "I'm sorry," he whispered, over and over. I tried so hard to get back to you. I never stopped thinking of you. I never stopped loving you." Her fingers curled around his. "I knew," she whispered. "I knew you'd come." He pulled out the letter she had written in 1993 and laid it gently in her lap. "I carried this the whole way," he said, tears falling. It got to me, Mags. You reached me. She smiled, faint but radiant. I waited, she said. I know, he whispered, placing his forehead against her hand. You saved me. For the next hour they spoke of everything and nothing. Time collapsed between them. She told him about the airport, the book she'd read, the strangers who became friends. He told her about the years lost and how every road he took led back to her name. And when she finally drifted to sleep, peacefully for the first time in days, James remained at her side. Charlie watched through the window. He wasn't a man who cried often, but he let one tear fall. Just one. Because he had witnessed something few ever do. A promise kept. A reunion that shook not just a terminal, but two lives forever. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of paper. James sat beside Margaret's hospital bed, her hand still loosely held in his. She was sleeping now, her breathing steady but faint. Peaceful. As if she knew the wait was over. He looked down at the letter again, the one that had saved him. He'd read it a dozen times since it reached his hands in a dusty village post office in Cambodia. It had traveled across continents, crossed decades, and somehow found him. He unfolded it carefully, each crease a fragile reminder of everything they'd lost. My dearest James, it's been 8 years since you left. I still come to the airport every week, same gate, same chair. People think I'm mad, but I don't care. You made me a promise, and I believe in promises. I've written so many letters. I'm not sure if this one will ever find you, but if it does, if you are alive, know that I never stopped loving you. I never gave up, and I never will. I'll be here, always, waiting. Yours forever, Mags. James pressed the letter to his chest, eyes closed, breathing her words in like oxygen. For years he had lived in silence, in the shadow of a name he couldn't remember. When his memory began to return, it came in flashes. A woman's laugh, the smell of books, a green coat. But he hadn't known what to do with it until this letter arrived. The villagers knew someone at the embassy. The embassy traced the name. A story emerged. The woman who waited. And James remembered. He remembered everything. He flew to Bangkok, then to Tokyo, then to Chicago. The last leg of his journey, the final act of a decades-long search. He looked at Margaret now, her features softer with sleep, her hands folded like they always had been in his dreams. He whispered, "You saved me, Mags. You kept me alive." Charlie stepped into the room, holding 2 cups of hospital coffee. He handed one to James and sat quietly. "She's strong," Charlie said. "Always has been." James nodded. "I never thought I'd see her again." Charlie leaned back in his chair. She never doubted, not once. The 2 men sat in silence, the weight of the years pressing down like a quiet snowfall. And in that stillness, Margaret stirred. Her eyes opened, slowly, deliberately. "Did you read it?" she asked, voice barely audible. James leaned forward, smiling. "Every word." She smiled too, tired, but whole. "You were worth it?" she whispered, and he, with tears falling freely now, answered, "So were you." Spring came quietly that year. In the weeks that followed their reunion, Margaret stayed at the hospital, her body frail but her spirit luminous. Nurses said they'd never seen anything like it. A woman whose strength seemed to return not from medicine, but from the simple presence of love finally restored. James was there every day. He brought her flowers from the park, read aloud from her favorite books, played jazz from a little speaker he carried in his pocket. They shared stories, filled in the blanks of their separate lives, and marveled at the fact that somehow, against all odds, they had found each other again. Margaret, though tired, was never more alive. And when she spoke now, It was with a softness born of peace. "I used to wonder if I was foolish," she said one afternoon, sunlight pouring through the window. "Sitting there for so long, watching people come and go." James reached for her hand. "You weren't foolish, Mags. You were brave." She looked out at the trees, now blooming with new life. "Everyone always told me to move on, but something inside me just wouldn't let go. And thank God for that," he said, "because I might never have come home without you." A few weeks later, Margaret closed her eyes for the last time. She passed in her sleep, her hand in his, her heart finally full. She left behind no children, no spouse, no grand estate. But what she did leave behind was a legacy, a love story that spanned 40 years, a lesson in patience, faith, and the quiet power of keeping a promise. At O'Hare Airport, near Gate 17, a small plaque was installed months later. It read, "In memory of Margaret Whitmore, the woman who waited, a testament to love that time could not erase." Every day, travelers pass by it. Some stop, some don't. But those who know the story, the real story, never forget it. As for James, he stayed in Chicago. He volunteers at the airport now, helping veterans and displaced travelers. Sometimes he just walks the terminal, listening to the announcements, remembering the sound of her voice, the look in her eyes when she finally saw him again. And on sunny afternoons, he sits by that plaque, the same seat where she once waited. And when someone asks why he's there, he simply smiles and says, "Because she was right to wait." Sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in fairy tales or perfect timing. Sometimes it waits in silence, in faith, through years, through distance, through everything that tells you to give up. Margaret waited. Not because she was naive, but because she knew the truth of her heart. And in the end, that truth brought James home. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. Have you ever waited for someone you loved? Or has someone ever waited for you? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new story. If you'd like to support this channel and help us continue creating powerful emotional stories like this one, consider leaving a super thanks. It means the world to us. And now, go ahead and watch the next video appearing on your screen. We promise it's another unforgettable journey.